Nothing in this podcast is intended as investment advice, and the people in this podcast may hold positions in the companies they talk about. Do not make any investment based solely on a tip or recommendation. Please do your own research.
Hello and welcome to Zach's Traders Cafe. Today I'm joined by Tim McCarthy, who's CEO at AIM-listed ImmuPharma PLC. How are you today, Tim?
Zach, hello. Great to speak to you again. It's been a little while, hasn't it?
It has. I think the shares have gone through the roof since we spoke, so maybe we should speak less often. I'm not sure what way around it should be. But anyway, ImmuPharma made headlines last week with a major milestone, the filing of a new patent on your flagship autoimmune platform P140. You called it the first Immunormalizer for precise diagnosis and treatment of autoimmune diseases. That is a big claim. Why is this so pivotal?
Yeah, great question. Everyone obviously is asking me a similar question. It's pivotal in lots of ways, Zach, to be honest. And maybe it's useful for me to just put it all into context because there's a bit of a story here leading up to the filing of the patent last week and the announcement of it. So your listeners, I'm sure, will recall that we had a big change around the management about 4 years ago in the company, and I stepped into the role of CEO. And that was just previous to that. We had taken P140. It was very much known then as Lupusol, but it's now designated P140 for obvious reasons, which I'll come on to. And we had put it into the company had put it into a phase 3 study to treat lupus patients, but unfortunately, it didn't meet its primary endpoint. That primary endpoint, as is usually in most of these studies, is that the patients on the active drug responded better in the trial than those patients on placebo. And when I say better, there's a statistical measuring that one does in these sort of trials, and the improvement of the active patients, of the placebo patients, needs to meet that statistical requirement. And unfortunately, it didn't. Now, that's not to say that the drug didn't work in lupus patients. It did. We got actually pretty good positive results in the active arm, but it was confounded by a number of different factors. And when the whole management changed, we did a number of things, actually. We completely reorganized the company and the group structure, and there was a lot of things we did to bring costs down and overheads and bring the company into a much tighter frame. And in all of that, we ended up with what we have now, PLC, and we have ImmuPharma Biotech based in France. And our newly appointed, in fact, CSO, Chief Scientific Officer, Sebastian Guduru, that was announced last week alongside the patent filing, was heading up what we now know as ImmuPharma Biotech. And he started to wonder what was going on and why, in view of all the positive results that the company received in the lupus trials in preclinical phase 1, phase 2, that we didn't quite meet the endpoint. We weren't that far off, to be fair, but we didn't meet the endpoint in that phase 3. So, being a scientist, being curious, that kicked off, his questions in his own mind. And he started to think about, right, how can we try and solve this puzzle? How can we get this back on track? And I remember at the time when the company announced the trial and not meeting its endpoints, I was non-exec chair at the time, and I remember doing more than one interview at the time saying, there's a real belief in the company that this drug is actually very effective. It's what we're looking at here is a failed trial, in other words, a failed trial design versus a failed drug. And I think it's that thought that got Sebastian thinking. So moving on, and this shows you how long research takes in our industry, and I'm sure your listeners will understand that. It started off a process whereby Sebastian, along with his colleague, Laura Moran-Ambrosino, who also got promoted last week into the position of head of research and development. And between them, they've been working on P140 how does it actually work, and what is the mechanism of action in the body system. And they started doing a number of preclinical studies, and a lot of the actual work, either preclinical studies and everything else, has culminated in the last couple of years. And that in turn has led to the filing of this new patent. And what drove them was as I say, their scientific curiosity to find out, well, why did that trial fail? And they came up with three observations. The first was that the dose that the patients were being administered was far too low. And what we've subsequently discovered is that the dose should have been somewhere between 10 and 15 times the amount that we were putting into the patients. So that the patients just were not getting enough drug. So that's the first thing. Secondly, in all of these trials, you bring the patients in and they're taking either the active or the placebo drug, but you also need to keep them on what they call the standard of care. In other words, what medicines they're normally receiving to, in this case, alleviate their lupus symptoms. And the main one is steroids. And steroids, as you probably know, act to suppress the immune system. The idea being that you try and suppress the symptomology of that particular disease, in that case lupus. But what it does, it confounds the results in a clinical trial where you're trying to test a drug against placebo. And so what we are planning going forward into the next study, is that we will have P140 dosed at much higher levels. We will have a protocol whereby the patients are what they call tapered off the steroids during the study, so that the effect of those steroids do not confuse the result. And then most crucially, what we have done, and this is the point of the patent that we filed last week, we've identified how P140 works, i.e. its mechanism of action. We have identified exactly who responds to P140, and we're calling that the super responders, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But in other words, when you are choosing patients in a clinical study, you have to do your best to identify those patients that will respond the best to your drug. And there was none of that stratification in the previous study, frankly, because the company didn't know how to stratify. And again, that is coming back to the patent, which is a combination of a diagnostic and a treatment, which I'd like to come back to in much more detail. But what it means is that we can now identify by a simple diagnostic test which patients will respond to P140, and they're what we call the super responders. And that goes into something else, which I'm sure you'll probably want to know a lot more about, and that's what we're now calling our type M immune disorder patients. Yeah. So, sorry, a very long-winded answer to your question, because I thought it was useful to put it into context for you, because the significance of the patent is manifold for ImmuPharma and its shareholders, and as importantly, probably more importantly, frankly, for patients across the whole autoimmune disease space. So we're now talking about the opportunity to expand the uses and application P140, not just from lupus, which was where it's focused before, but into all autoimmune diseases across the space.
And when did you get this? I mean, you were just looking at one little area, and you sort of found that the whole spectrum, or let's say it's a generalized term, but the whole spectrum of autoimmune disease could be addressed. When did that penny drop? When did that realization happen?
It's a funny thing in science that you sometimes you get that eureka moment where it all just comes together. But even those eureka moments are based on lots of years of research and innovative thinking, and then it all seems to just come together at one point. So I don't think, Zach, I can say, look, there was a moment on that date where it all came together. It was a combination of seeing different experiments, different preclinical studies, all of that coming together, and it starts to build a story. But what we started with was a hypothesis that P140, we believed, but we didn't have the evidence to back it up, we believed could be applicable across all autoimmune diseases. And one of the things that contributed to that thinking was that in all our studies in lupus, all the way through in preclinical phase 1, 2, and definitely in the phase 3 that I've just talked about, it was very, very safe. It is very safe. We have no serious adverse events. We have no really any side effects at all, frankly. And so that in itself makes you start to think, because, I often talk about the balance between benefit and risk when developing drugs. So, and what I mean by that is, at the end of the day, a drug is a chemical. And if you're putting any sort of chemical into your body, you're going to have some impact, potentially not very nice impacts on your body. So when you develop any drug, you've got to convince the regulators that the beneficial effect of that drug to treat whatever disease it's treating, the beneficial effect to the patient outweighs any risk or adverse events they're going to suffer at the same time. But we were seeing nothing, no adverse events whatsoever. So that is very, very, it's unusual. And so it starts a process of, well, why is that? And how is the drug working on the immune system? And we now understand. So again, another reason why this patent and the data and everything that's gone into that patent to support it and the claims, that's why it's so groundbreaking. And I've used this word a lot in the last week or 10 days. It is absolutely groundbreaking, this discovery. And that discovery is encapsulated into the patent clearly, which we filed and announced last week. But essentially, what we're saying is that the way that P140 works on the immune system, and coming back to your introduction there, we've coined the phrase Immunormalizer. And what that means is that we're looking at the underlying cause of all autoimmune diseases. And autoimmune diseases are caused when the immune system goes out of balance. And when the immune system goes out of balance, then your body's systems just kick in and say, oh, wow, look, there's something going wrong. It's a little bit like when you contract a virus or something like this. Your immune system is there, obviously, to help protect you. And so it starts producing its protection in terms of autoantibodies or antibodies in the case of a real virus. And that is where your immune system, that's what it's designed to do. And what we have discovered is the fact that when we apply P140 to a patient that has an autoimmune disease, and all the clinical trials to date have been on lupus, but this works on all autoimmune diseases, it essentially will regulate and bring back to the normal homeostasis, i.e. the balance of the immune system, whichever way your immune system is out of balance. So if it's got certain parts of the immune system, and I know Sebastian normally talks about B cells, if you've got more B cells in your immune system that's been generated that you require to bring it into balance, it will bring those B cells down into the normal level. Conversely, if you've got a depletion of B cells for whatever reason, it will boost those B cells, up to the normal level. This is not heard of. It's not heard of before at all in this space, and that's why it's so groundbreaking. But what we're doing is we're not trying to suppress the immune system, and this is what current treatments do. They, like steroids, for example, they completely suppress the immune system. There have been, in later years, developments from various companies that we call them immunomodulators, where they're trying to be a little bit more specific on targeting some part of the immune system and trying to regulate that. But the end result is they still suppress the immune system. So that comes with its side effects. And frankly, they're not as effective as they could be, because the immune system is there to work and benefit the patient. And if you're restricting it in any way, then one, you're going to get side effects. And secondly, it's impossible to suppress the immune system completely, because otherwise you'd have serious side effects, potentially fatal. But also, if you try to stop a disease by strangling the immune system, if I can use that phrase, then that's an impossible thing to do. You just cannot suppress the whole of the immune system. So the treatments today have a lot of issues with them. And what we've come up with is, I call it the magic, that we can now apply to autoimmune patients across the board, all different diseases, with applying P140. Let me just qualify that, because I said I'd talk about the type M immune disorder, which is what P140 is. So the diagnostic part of P140 allows doctors to diagnose patients at a very early stage. And that's important because currently, any of your listeners that have experience with autoimmune diseases will know that when you start to get symptoms, those patients get multi-symptoms, across the board, all sorts of different effects on their body. And they go to the doctor, say, I'm not feeling very well, and the doctor sort of tries to diagnose, and then it gets very difficult, and then they go across to see different specialists. And it could take years, it could take 2 or 3 years. I mean, I myself suffer from autoimmune disease. I've what they call Hashimoto's disease, which is the thyroid. And it took 2 years for doctors and specialists to diagnose me properly and then put me on replacement thyroxine. But that is the situation that patients are in. We're talking about up to 50 different autoimmune diseases here. And even when they're diagnosed, there isn't the treatment that's suitable in all the respects that I've mentioned. So what we've got in P140 is a very precise diagnostic, and we can identify across all autoimmune diseases that profile of patient which we call a super responder, which will respond to P140 because they have a certain profile. So it's important for me to clarify that we are talking across all autoimmune diseases, and there is a certain profile of patient within each of those diseases that will respond to P140 because they have what we call this type M immune disorder. Now, they're large proportions of each of those. The type M patients are large proportions, up or down, depending on the autoimmune disease. But it means that we can look to diagnose quickly and treat huge proportions of all of these autoimmune diseases across the board. And so for patients, that is, it's what they've all been waiting for obvious reasons. Yeah.
I mean, does that mean that this could be taken in a way as a preventative drug that the people who may be vulnerable to autoimmune diseases, that you just have it as or not say aspirin, but something like that once you're past a certain age and a certain state, you have this every now and again just to make sure that everything is because it's a smart regulator of the autoimmune system, right?
Yeah, it's a great question, Zach, because what we are talking about is that the diagnostic is so precise that we can identify those patients, that type M patients, before they're even getting symptoms. And that's how precise it is, because we can see what they're prone to, and so certainly the doctors can be proactive with those patients and put them on treatment of P140, such that essentially they prevent that disease developing. So it's slightly different to your thoughts, but it's along similar lines. So we're talking about being much more efficient with patients and diagnosing them so they don't have to suffer for their disease before they get diagnosed, get any treatment. But to pick up your point slightly differently to how you phrased it, but we can certainly identify those patients that are responding to P140 and identify them as the type M patients before they're even getting the disease. So, there was somebody was suggesting to me the other day, and I think certainly it's something which would be considered in the future. Could a diagnostic using P140 be using your normal annual health check? And absolutely, it could be. Yeah, in the same way that we'll go to our doctors for annual health checks and they have a full blood count, across all different areas. There's no reason that P140 could not be used in those series of tests to identify those patients that are vulnerable and potentially could then go on to treatment.
Right. Well,
Absolutely.
we've had a good chat, and I've got more questions I could ask her, from the perspective of somebody whose parents were doctors. So I'm obviously an expert in every area of this kind of thing. But a couple of questions that shareholders probably would be interested in, and we are kind of running out of time as well. So, a small biotech company comes up with a big win. The next move is normally some kind of partnership or deal with a big biotech or a big pharma company. Is that something we can expect?
Absolutely. And in fact, from the beginning of this year, I've been very clear in sort of putting out what our plan is for the year. And I'm pleased to say that we're on track. And what I said right at the beginning of the year, that 2025 is the year of delivery. We've spent the previous 3 years, as I explained before, when we changed the management of the company around 4 years ago, we spent 3 years preparing for this year. And it was in our minds, it was in my mind that we would certainly move towards getting this patent filed because we could see all the data coming together. We could see the results of this trials, the preclinical trials and experiments we were doing. And so we're bang on track with that. We announced that last week, which is why we're talking. And what I've also said is that will cement a number of discussions that we're already having with big pharma and biopharma to close a deal before the end of this year. And that is absolutely happening. And we're not starting from scratch here because we've had these hypotheses, we've had these ideas, we knew what we were building up to for the patent before last week, clearly. And so we're already engaged with a good list of pharma companies. And they're all extremely interested. You'd imagine they would be, because this is absolutely groundbreaking. There's nothing else out there like this. And there is a bit of a land grab going on at the moment in the autoimmune space. And if you look at a lot of the deals that have been done over the last 2 to 3 years with the big pharmas, all the big names, they're all investing enormous amounts of money into autoimmune. And a lot of them are going outside because they can't generate this research and ideas and drug opportunities. They can't generate them all in-house. So there's an awful lot of activity in license deals. There's some acquisitions being done of companies as well. And we're talking enormous amounts of money being put up by big pharma because they realize that they have to try and identify the best assets out there and that they have to pay up for them. And it's worth them paying up for it because the opportunity, the commercial opportunity is huge in this area. So those companies we have been talking to for a while and they know what we've been doing. And this is the trigger because the filing the patent is the trigger because they clearly want to see that all of our ideas or all our hypotheses are put into a patent, and filing the patent itself is an indicator that we've worked with our specialist patent agents. They've advised us, we put our input in, and they're very confident, as is we, that patent is going to be solid, it's going to be granted, it's supported by very, very solid data. And so that is the trigger for these pharma companies to then come back to the table, which they already have done in the last week, to say, right, okay, let's get it on now, and let's see what the patent says, which we can do under confidentiality, and let's dive deeply into this to really understand how you're backing up your claims of this hypothesis and how P140 works, because clearly they need to do their diligence. But we're not at a standing start here. We've got relationships already with a number of these companies, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the very, very positive response and reactions. Even in the last week since we put the patent notice out. So Yes, we've laid that out in the beginning of this year. Shareholders of the market should certainly expect a deal or deals in the plural between now and year end. And frankly, those deals could happen at any time between now and year end. But that's the space we've given ourselves to get some deals done by the end of this year.
Right, just a couple of points to tick off as well. First one, clearly the market's always concerned about biotechs and fundraisers and everything else. I'm assuming that you've got all that covered, which is possibly because that might explain why the shares have gone up so much and stayed up, or largely stayed up, because you are relatively solid on the financial front, and presumably also the market is expecting that when you do your partnering with the big pharma, it will be a sugar daddy type of deal in which you are helped and pushed forward by that deal financially.
I could give you a very short answer and say yes to all that. Let me just expand a little bit. The reason that the share price has gone up so much and the positive response from the market is, I think, the recognition of the significance of the patent in itself. Yes, then that leads on to what next? Well, obviously, the company's going to do the deal, as I've just explained, and as I said, those deals are pretty chunky, in whichever way we shape those deals. And so you've also got to look at the underlying value of the company before the share price rise. I mean, it was just ridiculously low, both in terms of share price, but more importantly, the underlying valuation. And we were valued at less than £10 million before we put this announcement out. And we're talking about a technology here which is going to change the autoimmune space. And I say that without hesitation. And that is being recognized by the pharma companies. So it's not about the share price per se. It's about understanding what the real value of the technology is that we have in ImmuPharma. And that's just P140 we'll talk about here. And we do have other products in the portfolio, which actually we don't talk about an awful lot, but they have an inherent value in their own right. So yes, I think there is recognition from the marketplace that we have started to deliver. I know they being the marketplace and our shareholders particularly have been very frustrated, a bit upset sometimes that things haven't moved any quicker than they have, and I appreciate that. But it's the cash, I can absolutely confirm to you, is not an issue. In fact, it's talking about coincidences. When we put an RNS out this morning to say we'd had a warrant holder exercise warrants, and there was another 125,000 come into the company. It wouldn't surprise me if more warrant holders actually look at this and say, well, we need to get our shares and we need to ride the upside on this. But all of this contributes to a very, very solid cash position. We certainly do not need to worry about cash right through into the second half of next year. And the cash that's going to drive the company forward is going to come from deals, which is what we've just been talking about. So absolutely no problem with cash. It doesn't even cross my mind now. What I'm concentrating on with the rest of the team is getting some deals done, and that's what's taking our time right now, and will do for the next period.
And just to summarize, where is IMM at the moment, and how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, without being over the top, I'm on a scale of 11, if I'm honest, because I have to admit I've been in this business a long time, and I've never been in this position, and the reason is that this is absolutely unique. This drug, the patent we've just filed, what it has the potential to do to change the whole autoimmune space for patients. I mean, it's the sort of thing which, you dream of being involved in when you get involved in the industry, because, the primary objective of all companies like ImmuPharma is to do good research, good development, and get effective drugs out to patients to help patients. And this is what we have here. Absolutely. So, along with the rest of the team, are running very high at the moment on positive emotion, let me put it that way. However, we're also very practical, and we're getting down to it, and we're just going to crack on with what we say we'd do.
I mean, it just seems, I mean, this is maybe off the mark, but it just seems to be almost as revolutionary in your area as the weight loss jabs have been in that area. I mean, it could be something which is transformational to people in that in a similar way.
Transformational, yes, I would agree with. Absolutely transformational, Zach. And, in a sense that from a market opportunity, which obviously translates into number of patients, this is as big, if not bigger, than your example of the weight loss drugs. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, on that note, we will close proceedings. But in the meantime, Tim McCarthy from ImmuPharma, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you for listening. Remember to visit our website for more news and other podcasts at www.share-talk.com.